Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Just Ask Annual Aphasia Conference, Turning the Page on Aphasia. This is our 7th annual conference, and it is a free conference for all to learn more about aphasia. I would like to introduce our team leader for our conference right now. It is Kate. Kate, I'm going to take it away to you to kind of introduce our guest speakers and other information people may need to know. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Denise. Good morning, everybody. Thanks to those who are tuning in extra early and those who are tuning in at 9. Welcome. If you didn't join us last week, as Denise mentioned, the slides from each week will be posted on our website under the conference page. And at the end of the month, at the very end of the entire conference series, the video recordings of each presentation will be posted. So I know y'all are excited to get all the information from each of these presentations. The slides will be available at the end of each week, and the recordings will be available at the end of the month. Today, we are so excited to have Dr. Sarah Wallace with us. She is our guest speaker for today and is a professor and program director within the Department of Communication, Science and Disorders in the School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences at the University of Pittsburgh. She teaches, conducts clinical research, and leads the Communication and Cognition Lab at the University of Pittsburgh, where she mentors students and supports interdisciplinary work. Dr. Wallace is an ASHA-Fellow and our current president of Aphasia Access. Outside of her time supporting clinical and academic research endeavors, you can catch Sarah out on the trails completing ultra marathons. Very cool. So I'm going to let Sarah dive in just a moment. But before we get started, I just want to let everyone know if you have any comments or questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put those in the chat. And we will address, we have a Q&A section at the very end that we will address any questions and comments throughout. And lastly, for those of you who are clinicians and are here for CEUs, if you are a RISHA or MISHA member, a member from the Rhode Island or Massachusetts Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, you can tune in to instructions in just a moment from Mary Jo. For any other clinicians that are here from other state organizations, all you need to do is keep an eye out for a certificate of completion that will be dropped into the chat at the end of the session today. All right, and Mary Jo, I'm going to turn it over to you for just a moment for RISHA and MISHA members.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Please know, those of you, I just dropped the link into the chat to sign in. We take attendance at the beginning, at the end. I take screenshots as well to make sure that everybody's documented and you earn the credit that you deserve. I've also pasted a link to a little slideshow that has more information detailing the process. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. There was registration that you should have completed in advance, but if I see someone, I'm checking those lists, so I may private message you or reach out after the fact if I don't have the information you need. So I think it should run smoothly. And thank you. Thank you to the organization for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Yes, I forgot to mention that we are giving a big thank you to URI, the University of Rhode Island, for sponsoring our CEUs, as well as RISHA. And Mary Jo is on the board at RISHA and is donating a lot, volunteering a lot of her time and effort to coordinate CEUs for you all. So thank you so much. Okay, Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks so much, Kate. And, thanks to the Just Ask organization for inviting me to be here. I'm really thrilled to spend some time with you all. And this is especially heartwarming because I see a lot of familiar faces here. And it's just so great to see so many friends when you log in on a Saturday morning to give a talk. So thank you all for being here. I am going to keep the chat a little hidden, at least to start. So if you have any questions or concerns, folks have promised to kind of ping me. But as we get going, I can jump in and monitor the chat a little bit. And thank you, Kate, for the really warm introduction. I super appreciate that. I'm excited to get to talk to y'all about reading today. It's one of my favorite topics to get to talk about. And I have what I think is a lot of great information for you all. I'll try to make sure that we're not going too fast and that that the information is really clear for everyone. And also the handout will have all the information in case there's something you want to look back to. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I have some boring disclosures, but here they are. A lot of our research has been supported by the NIH, and we're grateful for their support, as well as various universities. More importantly, I'm super grateful for my collaborators. I work with several research teams, and two of the teams whose work I'm going to be talking a lot about today are kind of shown here, including my colleague who's an occupational therapist. And that's such a great opportunity to get to work closely with her. All right, so let's dive in a little bit more to some of the meat of talking about reading. Now, I know here I have some speech language pathologists, some care partners, and other people who care about people with aphasia, and also people with aphasia. So I'm probably telling you something that you already know, but there's a lot of different reasons why we read, and reading can be something that people miss a lot after they acquire aphasia. And some of the important reasons that we read are to manage safety and different medical needs, various daily activities. Some people read for pleasure. Reading can also be a way that we build relationships, increasingly so with sending text messages or emails or using social media. Reading's involved a lot in our relationships. And then sharing information. So reading has a really important role in our lives, much more than just something like picking up a book and enjoying reading for pleasure. And again, this group already knows that people with aphasia can have problems with reading that can persist long beyond the time of their stroke. And this can make reading challenging, both in understanding what you read, but also not liking the speed at which you can read. All right, so here's kind of an outline for some of the strategies I want to talk about today. We're going to spend the most time on these first two strategies. So we're going to talk about modifying or changing materials. And then given the topic today, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the use of technology. And then I'll share a couple other strategies that I've learned about from working with people with aphasia or we've seen in the literature. So the first of these strategies we sometimes call aphasia-friendly modifications. And there's an example up here in the corner. This can include things like increasing the size of the text in the written information, having a clear font, having additional white space. So when the sentences aren't super close together and there's more white space on a page, having vocabulary or sentence structures that are more simple. When we highlight or focus on salient or important information, or when images are added. So all of these are potential strategies that can help to make materials easier to read. And we've looked at these across a few different studies or projects. So I wanted today to give some examples of some of these projects and some of these places where we've used these types of materials. part of the reason that I've been particularly interested in this topic is because a colleague of mine, my friend who's an occupational therapist, does research on home exercise programs. So home exercise programs are the things that the therapist asks you to work on at home. I've had home exercise programs from a physical therapist, from an occupational therapist, and from a speech therapist. So I've had the experience of being told to work on some exercises as like homework or home practice. And I know that it can be hard to stick to some of those exercises, or it was hard for me. So my colleague studies ways to improve people doing those exercises at home. And she and I paired up because we were really interested in making sure that people with aphasia have the same access to those home exercise programs, and that research about how to help people after stroke or brain injury also were sure to include people with aphasia. So I want to show you some of what we've had a chance to do together. Whoops, I just zoomed in on my screen. So let me fix that really quick. There we go. All right. So here are, throughout the presentation, I'm going to share a few articles so that you can see that some of this was based on evidence. A part of the reason I really like this slide, though, is I also learned from my occupational therapy friend how important real life activities as exercise are. And one of the exercises we assigned someone once was brushing their dog as part of their working on some of their hand strength and things like that. So here are some examples of how we changed or modified some of our materials. Some materials are used to determine goals or to measure outcomes. So we wanted to be sure that our home exercise programs were shaped around things that were interesting or important to people. So we used things like this slide here that has a scale where we asked people, how much do you do this activity and what's the quality of that activity? Normally, these are questions that a clinician might just ask somebody. And for people with aphasia, it helps them if we provide some images and some scales to answer the questions. So this is an example of one of the things we did. Here's another example. How important is this to you? We also would have people keep journals or logs about their exercise, and that can involve quite a bit of reading. Typically, you might have to answer questions or something like that. So this is the way we adapted some of those logs or journals. We had people answer questions on these scales. And then the other thing that can sometimes be hard for these home exercises, sometimes there's a lot of new equipment. So this is an example where we had people have exercise bands, and we wanted to be sure that people could be as independent as possible with managing the equipment that we gave them for their home exercises. So we created instructions that included images, larger fonts, simple sentences, rather than pages and pages of instructions that someone might have to have. Here's another example of how people logged their exercises. So they could tell us how many repetitions they did, and they could read instructions about how much they're supposed to practice. And I don't know about you, but even without having aphasia, it's really helpful to have some images that show me what the exercise looks like step by step. Because when I'm in someone's therapy room, it seems really clear what the exercise is. And if they write down picking up a cup, or even if they wrote out all the steps, I may not remember exactly what it looks like. So this is an example of what we did to support people. Way from home programs to another important life activity. One of my students was really interested in being sure that people with aphasia could read information about their medication. And so Anna Saylor investigated how we could make instructions for medication more friendly. I was looking when I was putting together these slides for like the receipt thing from Rite Aid, because even though it's not medication instructions, it's like the longest thing with the most information. And the best I could find was kind of this scribbly page. But that's what this makes me think of. So here's an example that she made up a fake medication, but she based this off the amount of text and the reading level of real medication instructions. So this is an example of a medication instruction that someone would be expected to gather information from and understand. And then here's the example of what Anna made that contained the same information, but wrote it in a more aphasia-friendly manner. So this could support somebody's reading in that they could read about important information related to their medication. And here I'm going to promise not to show too many research results, but I think this shows pretty clearly. If we look, the people with aphasia, which I think is what we're most interested in, are here in the blue. And this shows with unmodified towards the left, and then the aphasia-friendly modifications on the right, how much better people understood that information. We can also see that people without aphasia had some slight improvements with the more aphasia-friendly modifications. And then I think this is what's most important. This is what people with aphasia told us. They told us things that they really liked about the modified materials and even things they didn't like about the modifications. So some things that stood out, they thought that the presentation really grabbed their attention and it helped that it was broken up in headings. They still didn't like that it wasn't in color. They thought that that would have potentially been helpful. And they still thought some of the instructions were confusing. People without aphasia also commented on how much the aphasia-friendly modifications required so much extra paper. However, the majority of the comments are really positive, and I think could be useful in thinking about how to support people with aphasia being able to read real life things like medication instructions. Oops, sorry, I skipped ahead. So I want to kind of summarize some of this information that people with aphasia-friendly modifications seem to be helpful, and that there may still be some other strategies that are needed. For me, I think it means that occupational therapists and physical therapists who are going to assign home programs may still need some training in how to best communicate with people with aphasia. I think also pharmacists or other people who are providing medication instruction may need some training about how to best talk with people with aphasia. I think that combined with some modified written information could really help them. And then amount of paper continues to be a concern. Aphasia-friendly modifications do tend to take up a lot more paper. And so we could look at some ways to do those electronically instead. And then a lot of people suggested doing video demonstrations for the home exercises. And I think that's a great idea. There's programs online that have some instructions that are provided via video. And I think that could be really helpful. So, one of the things that people with aphasia have told us, and maybe some of the people in this presentation are thinking the same thing. All these modifications are great, Sarah, but what do I do if I don't have modified materials to read? So here's a couple of suggestions or ideas. A lot of people with aphasia find that large books that have a larger font that are usually created for people who have visual impairments can be really helpful. And those are often available at libraries, and you can order books with larger fonts online. There are also a lot of different types of reading materials that might have more images, and so it may be helpful to read those types of reading materials. There are some materials for English language learners, or sometimes called English as a Second Language resource. I know those are available at our public libraries in Pittsburgh, and those can sometimes have some of that simplified text that can be more helpful while still not being like childish language. So that could be helpful. Um, Also, I encourage people to be sharing some of this research with the people they come in touch with, because there could be a lot of opportunities for other clinicians, healthcare providers, and maybe even people in your community to make some of their materials aphasia friendly. I've seen examples before where people do things like menus and things like that that can be more aphasia friendly. And then last, there are some specific resources out there that are designed to be more aphasia friendly materials. And TalkPath is one of the examples of that. All right, so hopefully that rate was okay. And we've kind of covered our first strategy. Whoops. Oh, I had one other example. I'm so sorry. The University of North Carolina also has some aphasia-friendly documents that have been created by the students there. I tried to make a QR code, but this link is also in the presentation handouts, so that could be available if people are interested. These are made by graduate students, and they have a whole wide range of materials that are available. Okay. So as I had mentioned, we in our research have really focused on trying to listen to people with aphasia and understand from them what's most helpful. And as we were doing some of this work related to aphasia-friendly modifications, we talked with people with aphasia, and they said that, those modifications are great, but it doesn't give them a lot of independence as a reader. And I'd be curious, maybe people in this audience are thinking something similar. And so people with aphasia encouraged us in a research study we did where we talked a lot with people with aphasia. They encouraged us to start to investigate technology as a way that people with aphasia could get back to reading, but could be more independent. And that took us on a new research journey. And I'm going to share some of that information with y'all now. The technology that we've explored is text-to-speech technology. We've been doing this for over a decade now, and the technology has changed dramatically and is so much more available. When I first started talking about text-to-speech systems, I would have to explain right from the very beginning how the technology worked. And now it's a little more commonplace for people to have similar types of technology. But generally, text-to-speech technology takes written text, and there's a lot of different ways it can do this. With some of the technology, you can take a photo, you can upload the text. Sometimes the text might already be on your device. The system analyzes the text and produces a spoken output. And what this provides then is the person to have spoken and written information at the same time. And I forgot to make sure the sound was on, but it might actually even be a little distracting. So I'm going to show you kind of what this would look like. And I'm not going to worry about the sound too much. But
a text of downtown.
So
Walking.
Let me see. Maybe I thought it was highlighting. So let me see. I can share the sound really quick.
Through downtown Juneau toward all the summertime vendors, the amount of food choices may seem almost overwhelming.
Okay, so you get to see kind of an example. And then in
vendors.
This example, we also show how you can go back and highlight a particular word and have it read it out loud. So there's lots of different features of text-to-speech systems. And that can be, there's different things that you can look for in different systems. And I'll talk a little bit about that. what we hypothesized at the beginning of our research is that text-to-speech systems could help people with aphasia and maybe other people as well, because it reduces some of the cognitive and language demands when you have this dual modality presentation. So when you can both hear it and see it at the same time. Again, based on our conversations with people with aphasia, we were also eager for this technology to potentially provide more independence for people. So here's an example of the personalized features, which is a really nice aspect of text-to-speech. You can change the voice often. You can change the gender of the voice. You can have a different accent. I don't know if there's like a more East Coast for some of the folks from Rhode Island, like that kind of accent, but you can have lots of different accents or dialects that are used. There's also adjustments to the rate of speech, which people find particularly helpful. And you can include highlighting, which is kind of shown in the image here, where you can have individual words highlighted or this whole sentence highlighted. There also are some text-to-speech systems that can add images or have image support. So there's a lot of really interesting features, which is another reason we thought this technology could be helpful. This is a non-exhaustive list of some of the technology that is available, and these range in price from free to a couple $100s. And usually what you get with more money is more features. So if you look at the picture down on the bottom right-hand corner, this technology is called Kurzweil, and it's one of the more expensive technologies. And then you kind of look at all those buttons there, and at least to me, I'm like, oh, I understand it has a lot of features. We tend to use some of the less complex technology for a lot of our research studies. We have used Kurzweil sometimes, but when we give people the devices to practice on their own, a lot of times we use Natural Reader and we use a free version. So there's not a lot of bells and whistles, but it has a lot of nice capabilities even in the free version. So this slide is just to prove to you that what I'm going to be talking about, there are a lot of research articles published on these topics, and I'd be happy to dig into or answer questions about specific studies, but I want to just jump to sharing some of the results with you, because I think that is kind of, that's what we're here for, to hear some of the focus on that. But our group has studied things like looking at highlighting or different rates of presentation, different types of reading materials. We've tried to kind of do some exhaustive investigation. And some of what we found is that text-to-speech systems do help some people with aphasia better understand what they're reading. It helps some, but maybe not all. There are also people with aphasia also often prefer text-to-speech compared to not using text-to-speech, so reading without that kind of support. In terms of the rate, there's a lot of variability in preferences, but people tend to prefer what we would call medium rates of speech, so not really fast presentation and not really slow. It turns out so far it hasn't made a huge difference in their comprehension as a group, but individually people see some differences. And then people tend to prefer some type of highlighting, although things are a little mixed in terms of whether it should be single word highlighting, which some people say helps them really follow along, or if it should be whole sentence highlighting. One of my favorite quotes from someone with aphasia was they said that the single word highlighting was too much. It was very overwhelming. It felt like they were being poked in the eye. And I thought that was a really good illustration of something that was distracting for them rather than helpful. A lot of people say that some type of highlighting helps them find their place as the voice is speaking out loud. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So I'll talk a little bit about what you might do if you're interested in the benefits of text to speech. One potential idea is to use audiobooks. I'm not sure how many other people in this group might use audiobooks, but that can be an option. A lot of libraries have audiobooks that you can check out. And so you don't even have to pay for them all the time. And then some people with aphasia have talked about a lot of benefit to playing an audiobook and following along with the paper book. I don't know about all of you, people who've, maybe tried something like this before, but I know some of our folks in our own book club listen to the audiobook and then go use the paper book to go back and read some parts that they thought maybe were a little bit confusing or hard to understand. That's a little different than having the audio and text available at the same time, but that could be something that would be helpful to people. And then you may just be interested in trying some of these text-to-speech systems. Like I said, there are many that are available for free, and some people do choose to use them as an adjunct for like helping them read text messages and things like that. So I was just, oh, thanks. Yep, someone asked if I could slow down just a little bit. I was just checking in on the chat. Yeah, Deborah, there are some text-to-speech systems that are free. And then Trish put a link in there maybe to a place where we can get some books. Okay, perfect. Oh, good. Okay, I got a couple private messages, so I will make sure to slow down a little bit. Was there anything that I went too fast on just now that folks want me to get back to? I'll look in the chat and see if there's anything. Just tend to get so excited. Yeah, Fred asked, can you put text to speech on the computer? You definitely can. I'm going to go back a couple of slides again, just in case some of this was a little fast. So some of these systems are actually systems that people put on their computer. So Kurzweil, again, that more expensive one, is an example of this. A lot of them are apps that you could put on a tablet or on a phone. And so we've used Natural Reader with Samsung tablets quite a bit in some of our research and had good luck with that. And this isn't even all of the systems that are available. Zoom Reader does also have a free version that you can use. And some people have liked using Zoom Reader. That's one where you take a picture of the text and then it can read it out loud.
Yeah.
And then and then I think someone mentioned too, like there's settings. Yeah, thanks so much. There's settings on the computer that can allow that to be read out loud. And this is kind of wild to us because when we started this type of research, a lot of these things were not available. So a lot of text-to-speech systems weren't so widely available, and now they are so much more widely available. Yeah, that's great. And someone said they use Speechify as another version that might be helpful. So yeah, sorry if I went through. This slide tends to be one people want to take a lot more time, and I sometimes go a little fast on it. Partly because I don't endorse any particular product. I think it really is person dependent. So I like that there's free resources available because free is a really great price in my mind. And some people might want to pay just a little bit of money, maybe to have some additional features. In my experience, you don't need to pay for the most expensive technology. And again, a lot of computers and phones and things like that come with those now. Okay, so I hope I didn't go through all of those too fast. We are going to talk a little bit more about text to speech, so we can come back to some of those questions too. Another thing some people with aphasia find really helpful is to practice reading aloud with their written material. This can be something that has been shown to improve reading if that's something people have a goal to do. It also, for some people with aphasia, it can help with your comprehension. Some people with aphasia find that reading aloud doesn't help with their comprehension and can sometimes feel like it's harder to do than just reading alone. So this isn't for everyone, but some people do like to practice reading aloud. For some people, it can be really helpful to practice with somebody. So if there's somebody you know who might read with you, you could take turns reading some things out loud, or they could maybe help you if you get stuck on a particular word or something like that. Based on the research, I would recommend starting with texts or materials that are a little familiar or on a familiar topic. So I'm not a physicist, so I wouldn't start with something related to physics, right? I would start with something maybe related to running or related to working at a university. So topics that are more familiar tend to be a bit more beneficial for people. And then some other strategies that some people with aphasia can find really helpful to do. There are some strategies that are focused on attention. So there is some evidence that reading can be impacted by a lot of distractions. So one strategy is to find a quiet room when you're reading. Finding a quiet place to read can be really helpful. It might be hard to read in a loud coffee shop, but it might feel fine if you were to sit outside a quiet, like on a quiet street or something like that in a coffee shop. So thinking about the environment that you're reading in can be really important. We talk about this a lot with our book club when some people are doing some reading within our book club or want a few minutes to read something. We try to make sure the room is really quiet. Another strategy that people find helps with attention is either using an index card or their finger to follow along with the text. I think about this as being a lot like the highlighting of keywords or underlining keywords as you're moving through a text, right? So that can be helpful. I have this picture here of a little device that you could even make one yourself, but it helps focus on just that single line of reading and moves away some of the other potential distractions. So a lot of people find something like this can be really helpful when you're trying to read or get back to reading. Additionally, if comprehension can be hard, sometimes focusing on specific keywords and not getting really hung up on some of the smaller words can be really helpful for people. So, you may want to try to focus your attention on some of the most important topics of a reading as you're going through and reading and not letting yourself get as distracted by details. A strategy that a lot of people in our book club use is to summarize the text either at the end of a page or end of a paragraph. And we never intend for this to feel like homework, but we find that if you pause and kind of summarize what you've talked about so far, or sorry, what you've read about so far, it can be helpful for improving comprehension, right? It kind of allows you to synthesize what's happened. And you also don't allow yourself to get too far into the text and then realize all of a sudden that you're confused. And I'm stealing an idea from one of our group members this past week. She was talking about how she does that summarizing, and rather than saying it out loud or writing it in a journal, which is what we encourage some of our other group members to do, she started taking Post-its in her book, and she would write just as much as fits on a Post-it at the end of a page to kind of summarize for herself what's happened so far. One of the neat things about that too is there's no judgment or evaluating how well she wrote or anything like that. They're just notes for herself so that she can kind of check in and make sure that she's been understanding what's happening so far. Another thing that our group does a lot of is keep a list of main characters with names. Oh, I liked this example here on the side because I think, there can be a lot of written materials that have a lot of different characters, and it's hard to keep track of who all those characters are. And so it can be helpful to keep a list of main characters. Another neat thing is that as you go through a book, you can add what information you've learned about the characters, right? Because sometimes in the beginning, you only know one or two little things about them. Our Aphasia book club right now is reading a mystery, and so kind of a whodunit. So I was talking about how it would be so neat to keep adding up what they've learned about each character to see if that can help us figure out who did it, right? Because you have the person who's behaving badly, but maybe that's too obvious. So we've been having a good time talking a little bit about the main characters and if they're the one who was the murderer or not. So you could do that as well. So keeping a list of main characters can be really helpful. When our students are helping with our group, another thing that they have done is assigned pictures to each of those people. So if there happens to be a book that was made into a movie, you can pull the movie characters and have that picture be the guide to kind of give you an image too of who it is you're reading about. And sometimes we just make up the people if we don't have pictures to go on. So that can be also kind of fun, is finding a picture that we all agree is what that person or that character looks like. And then it kind of helps us as we go through the book. So we do that in our Aphasia group, but you could even do that on your own. You could find a picture on the internet that you think is who that person looks like to you. And then you can keep track of your characters that way. So that can be kind of a helpful strategy. And then in terms of other strategies, strategies may be used lightly. There's also people who are really interested in getting back to or improving their reading. And importantly, the strategies that I've talked about so far today, those could have an impact that would lead to improved reading, but that isn't really their main purpose, right? Their main purpose is all about getting people back to doing the reading in the current state they're in. So you could still have a lot of problems with reading and be able to try to read as much or as close to how you used to as possible. So these are a little different, and these are some applications that people could use to practice reading at home that are designed to help the person improve their reading. So again, a little bit different. And this isn't an endorsement of any particular technology, but just knowing that there's some things that exist out there, I think can be helpful information for people. There's also some strategies that your speech language pathologist might give you that can be things you can work on at home to help with your reading. Okay, so I want to kind of summarize some of the strategies that we've talked about so far. And you're right, I'm going really fast. So I'll try to slow down again a little bit. The takeaways here. I think it's good to test out what strategies work for you. So I talked about a lot of different strategies, and some may work for you and some may not. And that's okay, right? It's okay to pick the strategies that work best for you. Another important point is that some strategies help for specific materials and they don't work for other materials, right? So some of the strategies I talked about could be really helpful for reading a novel. But if you're reading a textbook, unfortunately, there's no character list that you can use with a textbook, right? So not all the strategies work for every type of reading material. You might be someone who thinks that text to speech could be really helpful for reading your text messages, but maybe you don't prefer it for things like reading the text in your recipe book, right? Maybe then having one of those line guides that can help you go line by line is more helpful. So thinking a little bit about different strategies that are for different situations for different people. Right? I'm sure I don't have to tell this group that personalization, individualization is really important. Another important point is to ask for help. So it's okay to ask other people to work on modifying materials, right? Maybe you want to ask your physical therapist to change the way they provide information to you. I think another important thing is that it's good to try to enjoy different types of reading. Maybe reading has changed since you got aphasia. And so maybe you read different types of material, right? One of our group members used to read a lot for his job. And he said, after my stroke, I don't want to read those really complex documents anymore. And so we talked a lot about, are there other types of reading that you would really like? And it turns out he likes reading things on social media, right? That's how he keeps in touch with people. That's how he learns about what's happening with friends and family. And there's nothing wrong with that as a type of reading, right? Sometimes society gets hung up on there's one way we read newspapers or books. But there's lots of different types of reading. And I think the best is just to enjoy whatever types are interesting to you. And then the last sort of takeaway here before I share some upcoming research is to consider joining a book club. So if there's a book club in your area that is for people with aphasia, that could feel really good. If there's a book club in your area that maybe isn't for people with aphasia, you could join and have an opportunity to teach that book club about aphasia and some of the things that might help you. And then there also are a lot of virtual book clubs and a lot of opportunities to participate in book clubs online, both for people with aphasia and people who don't have aphasia. I know there's also some social media groups where people share information about books they read. So kind of like book clubs that are asynchronous or don't actually meet online together, but you can share on social media or things like that about books you read. So lots of really great opportunities to kind of share that type of information. Okay, I wanted to talk with you all a little bit about some more current research as well. So related to all this reading research, we've been really interested in using eye tracking to learn more about reading. And I don't know if anyone in this group has had an opportunity to do eye tracking research before, like as a participant or as someone who is doing the research, but it's really interesting technology and it keeps getting better. So this is my slide again to prove that we have some research articles on this topic, but I'm not going to focus on any individual study, but just to show you that we have been doing this work and putting it out there. So why are we interested in eye tracking? Because sometimes technology is just added for technology's sake. So I want to show you why we're interested and what we think it tells us. So we know that people with aphasia have more trouble understanding what they read. And we haven't talked as much about it today, but a lot of other people with aphasia also tell us that one thing they get frustrated with is they can't read as fast as they used to. So their reading takes them a lot longer, and that means they don't enjoy it as much, or they get frustrated with how slow it is. And so that can be something that they don't like as well. So comprehension is one thing, but even reading slower, some people don't like. However, reading is something that takes place a lot inside our heads. And so we don't know exactly why people with aphasia are having problems understanding, and even more so, why they read more slowly. And so what eye tracking does, it allows us to observe the patterns of their eyes when they're reading, which doesn't answer all our questions, but it does give us a lot more information about how people are reading and maybe what some of the challenges are. So I hope this is getting you excited too, because it gets me excited. I am going to show you some examples from our research. So all of this research comes from people reading paragraphs. So they're reading a whole paragraph, a whole story. And we have pulled out individual sentences or phrases to show you as a diagram. What we're showing here has the sentence that the person was reading above. And then down below is the path of their eyes. Now, imagine it up above on the actual text, but this shows you each one of those numbers is a fixation or them lingering with their eyes a bit on a word. So this is a person who doesn't have aphasia, an adult reader without any reading impairments who doesn't have aphasia. And I'd love for you to put in the chat some things you notice about this person's reading. And again, it's not a video or anything, so it's a little limited, but what can you tell or what do you notice about the person's reading?
And Sarah, can you talk through one more time describing the like how long or how we're interpreting this? Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So each of these, so this is a sentence that someone was reading as part of a paragraph. And each one of these numbers is where the person's eyes paused for a moment as they were reading. So they were reading, Daniel arrived at the airport to catch a flight from Daytona to Tampa, and their eyes paused or lingered 9 times. This was the first time, and the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time, and the fifth time that their eyes just linger for or pause for just a little bit as they're reading. Okay, yeah. Someone mentioned that they skip or miss out on some small words. Exactly. So, like, even where this 3 is, maybe they're looking at, maybe they're looking at the, maybe they process them together. And there's no pause on the word to. There's no real clear pause on the word And even here, right, the person kind of has maybe some pauses, like they're kind of spread out from Daytona to Tampa, just had 3 different pauses or sort of looks at the words. Yeah, so that's a really good. I'm not sure I understand. What are the reading directions while driving? I'm not sure I understand your question, Fred. Can you tell me a little more? Yeah, I can tell you what we gave people as a direction. We would ask them to read a paragraph as they normally would, and that we were going to ask them some questions about the paragraph after they read it. So they knew they needed to remember some of the information. And that was the only direction. We asked them to read how they normally read, which is a little hard with the eye tracking system on and all that. But this was a really good point. So they skipped some little words. They also never looked back. That doesn't mean that people without aphasia never look back. But with this relatively straightforward sentence, the person kept looking forward always, right? They didn't read part of the sentence and then go back. Oh, yeah, Fred, this is a really good point about reading words on signs is another time where attention is really hard. And actually could be a really interesting study about people reading while they're driving. I don't know about that research. So here's an example of a person with aphasia reading. My slides are going to show you that people with aphasia are all different, as we already know. And this isn't meant to in any way criticize the person. What I think is nice is that this shows some of the challenges or differences that people with aphasia might be having. So I'd love for you all to put in the chat some things you notice about this. So again, this is a sentence. Thomas and his friends were playing soccer in a nearby field. And these numbers and the path show you kind of what the person with aphasia is doing as they read. So their first pause, their second pause, their third pause happened with the word and then they went back to this fourth and fifth, which were kind of on Thomas. And then they went back to and then back to Thomas, maybe and or his, right? So that's kind of what was happening here. Yeah, that's a good point. So the person is, a lot of people are commenting, they went back to read it 2 or more times. And yeah, Fred, I agree about the signs on the highway. And the person went back to reread the information. And yeah, you get to see that maybe they're recognizing some words more quickly than others. They're also, when we look back to this person without aphasia, they had 9 points they were looking at, or pauses. And this sentence is about the same length, and they had 31 of those. So what I think we can learn is, yeah, people with aphasia are needing to reread what they're doing, and they are looking a lot more, pausing a lot more than people without aphasia. And I think that definitely is what we see then when people with aphasia take longer to read and have a harder time comprehending. So I can show you a few more of these. I think they're really interesting. What we can learn from technology about reading. So here's another example of a different person with aphasia, right? So they're reading and they're looking at she, then maybe as, then maybe she again, then sipped, but they seem like they're kind of trying to figure out one of these words, either she or sipped. And then they start to move ahead. And then they go back a little bit. And then they start to move ahead again. And they make it all the way to wrinkled. And then they move back to Wendy. And you see they go back and forth between these words a little bit. So this kind of shows me, and I've done this myself when I'm reading something that's more complex, is they're looking at maybe the connection between the noun or the person and the verb. What did they do? Right? So they're trying to make that connection, which is really great. It's a good strategy. Yeah, Amy, I think that's one of the things I like about this, is that I think for people, this sort of shows you maybe what your eyes are doing when you're trying to read. And it helps us capture it in some really interesting ways. So I'm going to show you a couple more. Hopefully they don't feel too boring, but I want to prove this point that all people with aphasia are pretty different. So this is another person with aphasia. This is 32 eye gazes in 4 words. So this is a male participant. He is trying to understand this phrase. And for him, he's somebody who is trying to sound out each sound in that word to try to comprehend. And maybe that's something some of you can relate to, especially maybe when you get to a word that feels really challenging. He's spending a lot of time trying to figure out those individual sounds. And he's told us that before. And I think it's really interesting that his eye gaze behavior really highlights what he's explaining as a challenge, right? He's having to sound out each of the individual words. What we call this gentleman Carl, that's not his real name. And I think he was participant C, so we've nicknamed him Carl. One thing Carl doesn't do a lot of is go way back to the beginning, right? So once he feels like he understands a word, he keeps going, which I think is a really interesting pattern. Also, I think someone said this in the chat, but Carl can get really frustrated when he's reading. And I can understand, looking at this, how incredibly frustrating that would feel. All right. I said I have a lot of these. Again, I hope that people are as interested as me. This is a person who is quite different from Carl. She's looking here at the beginning of the sentence, and then she goes all the way out, almost done, and then goes back to the beginning again, and then goes all the way to the end, and then goes back to the beginning again. So I wonder how many people can relate to that feeling, which is very different from Carl, right? So she's somebody maybe who's having to take the whole sentence in and then goes back to the beginning to check on some things for comprehension. And one of the things, this is not a visual impairment. Thank you, Denise, for asking that. Everyone who's done this study has passed all kinds of visual screenings. And they have to be able to calibrate on the system. So they actually have to have pretty good vision. They could be they could need reading glasses, but they can wear their reading glasses while they do the study? It's a great question. All right, so I'll stop showing these because it gets a little repetitive, but here's another example, not quite Carl, and this person isn't looking back, but they are having to spend a lot of time on each word. And I think one of the reasons that this is so fascinating to me is that I think some of the people with different patterns to their eyes might benefit from different strategies, right? That isn't something that we've done before. We've kind of given a bunch of strategies and said, see what works best for you. But if we could use this to better identify who would benefit from which strategies, I think we could make a lot of progress. So we've started to investigate how people's eye movements change when they have access to text to speech. So I have a lot of slides on this, and there's a lot of text. So I'll go pretty slow and let me know if I need to repeat anything. So when we compare people with aphasia and people without aphasia, we know that people with aphasia spend longer reading. We didn't need eye tracking to know that, but we know that they spend more time reading. We also know that they fixate on more words. So if we take the whole number of words in a story, they have more of those lingering pauses than people without aphasia. And that's kind of shown in these images below. The red dots are fixations, or when the person's looking at text. And the left one is a person without aphasia, and the right one is a person with aphasia. You can see there's a lot more red dots, and the bigger the dots are, the more fixations or longer the fixations there are. So you get to see a whole lot of increased fixations. We also know, and it's harder to see on these pictures, but we know that people with aphasia compared to people without aphasia look back more. We call those regressions. So they look back in the text. We also know that their durations, or the amount of time that they spend fixating on words or looking at words, is longer. So we've only done some limited preliminary data, but what we've found is that people with aphasia reduce the number of fixations. So the number of times they have to look and kind of linger, and they have fewer regressions. They don't have to look back as much when we add text to speech. So that seems pretty promising. And I have some other slides. I'm going to peek at the chat really quick and see if there's... Oh, great. Okay. I think mostly comments, but I can come back and see if there's other specific questions. These were my data to kind of prove what I was saying in the earlier slides. And we don't have to go through this in a ton of detail, but each of these letters is a person with aphasia. And so it's meant to show you that people with aphasia here on the left side, they have fewer fixations when they have text to speech. But interestingly, people without aphasia, when they use text to speech, it increases their fixations. So we can sit and think on that one a little bit. So this is the finding I think we're most interested in, is that text to speech reduces the number of fixations, although there's some variability. And this slide, I apologize, there's just way too much here, but it's to highlight the looking back or regressions.
Can you say that statement again and just repeat it all about
Yeah,
people with aphasia versus people without aphasia? that phrase
Yep.
again. Say it nice and slow.
Yeah, and I can write it in the chat too, Denise, if that's helpful. So this slide shows that people with aphasia have fewer fixations when they have text to speech. They don't have to look at the words as many times. They start to have more of a neurotypical pattern. But people without aphasia, when you add text to speech, they actually have to look a lot more. Thanks, Kate. Which is interesting. It means maybe text to speech helps people with aphasia, but it doesn't help people without aphasia. I don't know. Okay, hopefully that helped. Again, this is a lot of information, but I wanted to show that people with aphasia, these red circles, that's how many times they have to look back when they're reading something, which is a lot, right? We saw that in the images. But when we add text to speech, which is this graph kind of right next to it, they have a lot fewer look backs, which is interesting, right? Maybe that is why it seems like it's helping. And I'm actually going to skip that one because we didn't talk about it too much yet. And then this is reading time. So people with aphasia without text to speech have a long time reading. We already know that. But when we add text to speech, their reading time goes down. So people with aphasia without text to speech have a long reading time. With text to speech, they read faster. However, adults without aphasia, their reading time gets longer when they have text to speech. Again, maybe it's not helping. Oh yeah, thank you so much for the question about comprehension. So that was a great teaser for my next point, which is we haven't tested their comprehension very well yet. These are all really early studies, and we're looking to get more funding to do more research to understand if this helps their comprehension. We did have people answer 2 short comprehension questions, but it was designed to make sure they were paying attention to the reading. So we don't really know about comprehension yet. It's a great question. We also are interested in using this technology, the eye gaze technology, to try to better match somebody's eyes with the auditory information. So I'll say that again. We've started trying out using eye gaze technology to match your eye movements with the rate of the auditory information with the text to speech, to try to make sure that you're getting the auditory and written information at the same time. So that's what we've been up to lately. And then that, to the person's question in the chat, that we're hoping will have a big impact on their comprehension. Yeah. Those are great questions. Okay, I'm ending a little early, but hopefully there's a lot of questions so we can get talking about those. I did want to thank our aphasia community, which is down here on the bottom of the slide. That's where I get a lot of my ideas and I learn the most from our group members, which are care partners and people who have aphasia. And then also I wanted to highlight my students. We have had students at the Miami University of Ohio, Andrew, who's up in this slide, and then Jackie and Bree. all of whom have really taken on a lot of the eye tracking research and helped us learn more about people with aphasia based on what we can learn from eye tracking. And then, as I mentioned, I'm really fortunate to have a bunch of collaborators. We can't do any of this work by ourselves. So, yeah, so I'm happy to take questions. Again, I tried to balance this with some strategies and ideas, and then also get you excited about some of the things we're interested in.
Well, thank you everybody for attending our second session. Want to remind everybody that this is a free program for people, because when I had my stroke, I did not think that I could afford a $400 webinar to learn about my disability. And when I became more improved, I said, I don't think anybody should have to pay to learn about a disability they didn't sign up for. So I am happy to continue to provide this as a free conference. But as you know, this is a nonprofit organization, and if anybody really enjoys the conferences and you're available to volunteer your time for other services or make a donation, we would greatly appreciate it. We could not do this without people that volunteer their time and their talents, such as Alicia Pizzata, trying to pronounce her name. She does all our social media for the conference. She does all the registration for us, and she's behind the scene, and we just can't thank her enough for what she does. And we have Dina from Rhode Island Wave helping us with the recordings and making sure that this runs well, and so that we can show this in a recording venue in the future. Once again, I just can't thank you all for attending and learning more. I'd like to ask Kate to give everybody an update of what we'll be doing next week.
Yes. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And I think some of the hardiest parts of these conferences are the Q&A at the end and the contributors and discussion with our guest speaker, Sarah. Thank you again so much for spending your Saturday morning with us. For those of you, just briefly, who are tracking personal professional development hours, I'm going to repost the certificate of completion in the chat. And we hope that you all join us next Saturday. We are having attorney Christine Diorsi-Fitta, and this is kind of a session for the whole family. All of these are designed to be for anyone invested in the aphasia community. The topic next week is going to be about understanding estate planning and probate. So looking at what's important to get in writing, or what are some going through some of that legal jargon that many of you have probably had to go through, or maybe are still going through. So it's going to look at understanding estate planning and probate, and should be a really interesting and informational session.
Yeah, so if your care partner wasn't joining you today, or your speech pathologist wasn't there, please invite them to join. This is very valuable information. As part of our survey last year, this was a topic people wanted to talk about, but they didn't want to talk about it out loud. It's sensitive, people don't like to talk about this, but it is very information we need to know. So looking forward to seeing you all next Saturday, and go out and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Thank you all.